Hey there, everyone. Art Burns here, wishing you well today. I hope you all had a great weekend. I hope Monday is treating you well, but I hope you are treating you well on this Monday also. And this is very, very important. As we know, as you've heard me say here, self-compassion is one of the strongest tools that we have to build our own resilience, to build our own sense of fulfillment, and to build our own, kind of emotional, the ability to regulate our emotions. And so I hope that you're able to show yourself some kindness and to acknowledge what you're going through and to understand that you're not alone, right? These are very important steps to self-compassion, and if you'd like more information about that, please just let me know. I'd be more than happy to share that with you. It's something I've now worked into my program with my clients, and everybody benefits very, very highly from it. So last night I gave another one of my weekly webinars called How to Tame Stress and Eliminate Reactivity in Less Than 8 weeks. It's a wonderful webinar. I love giving it. People enjoy it. People get a lot of benefit from it. So I'm told from many emails that I get the next day. But a couple of weeks ago, I actually changed the format a little bit, and I made it less about. And this was thanks to a comment from one of my attendees who pointed out that the information I was giving was a lot more about the risk factors of stress rather than, or not as much as she was hoping, about actually reducing the stress. So what I did was I tweaked it, right? I made it more about, I took out some of the information about the risks of chronic stress in terms of our health risks, and made it more about more focus on the actual practices and what it means to practice mindfulness and how mindfulness helps us to reduce the stress in our lives. And so thank you to that person. I don't want to call her out by name, but thank you again. I sent her an email. She was very happy that I took her criticism constructively, and I'm happy too. But today what I do want to do, because I think that this is very important information, right? It's very important to understand the risk factors associated with stress, because the problem is, I talk to a lot of people, about stress, and I talk to them about, what's going on with their stress, how the stress is alive in their lives and in their bodies. And one thing that I hear over and over and over again, right, is that, like, stress is just kind of part of my life. It's just what I do, and someday I'll figure out how to control it, but for right now I can't. It's just something I have to keep pushing through it, because this is what motivates me. I hear all kinds of things like this, right? And the fact of the matter is that stress is one of the most dangerous things that we experience, right? Stress is meant to, stress is a very important tool that we have in our physical, reaction to things, right? And the stress response is something that keeps us alive, very literally. And in fact, the stress response and the sympathetic nervous system in our evolution as human beings, this is literally why I'm able to sit here talking to an iPhone and recording this video with wireless, Bluetooth earbuds here, right? Like the stress response is what's allowed us to evolve to this point, right? But it's really about, like, the stress response is appropriate in about 3 to 4 minute batches, right? Like you're being chased by something, right? Think of like the natural world, right? The animal kingdom, right? Where a gazelle is being chased by a cheetah, right? Within as a really wonderful stress doctor named Robert Sapolsky says, in 3 minutes, either the threat is over or the gazelle is over, right? Like either the cheetah catches the gazelle in a few minutes or the gazelle is lucky enough to escape. But either way, in about 3 minutes or so, that stress response is no longer appropriate. And what the animal then does is allows it to come back. It allows its body to come back down. You go from what we call fight or flight into what we call rest and digest. From the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system, we bring ourselves back down, right? The problem with modern society, right, is that most of us are not in a dangerous situation here, right? Like most of us live in kind of relative safety in terms of safety from violence. We have houses that are pretty sound in structure and stuff. Now, this of course bars natural disasters and things like this, but I'm talking about just run-of-the-mill everyday life. Generally speaking, in modern Western society, is pretty safe. And so we don't need the stress response. However, as you've probably heard me talk about here, 77% of American adults experience chronic stress, and that word is the key there, chronic, right? A gazelle does not experience chronic stress. A gazelle experiences acute stress, right? It's acute stress that is over, again, within a few minutes, right? And that's the same thing that happens to you when you're in if heaven forbid, there's a car accident that happens. Your body is going to go into the stress response to make you react in ways that is going to get you through whatever you're going through, right? And in a few minutes, it comes back down. Right? That's how it works, right? But for 77% of American adults, 77%, and this was before COVID, right? So this is probably much higher now, but 77% of us, right? We live with chronic stress, and that is because the stress is caused by what we're thinking. Right, we're thinking about bills that are due. We're thinking about projects at work. We're thinking about social issues that we have. We're thinking about romantic issues we have. We're thinking about our health issues, right? But we're thinking about it in terms of like the outcomes, right? And when we think in terms of the outcomes, that's when our brains have this really cool thing that they do, right? Cool in a scientific sense, like fascinating sense, but not very convenient for us, right? Because the brain, what it always does, right, is it's always going to picture the worst possible outcome. Like as soon as you start thinking about what might happen, what outcome might happen, your brain and your mind are always going to go to the worst possible one, right? It's part of our survival technique. Again, talking about evolution, right? That is what's allowed us to evolve, right? That plus the stress response, right? That what we call a negativity bias, right? We're always going to go to those negative things, right? And the problem is, right, is that when we start thinking about those negative things, right? Another very fascinating thing that's true about our body and our mind and our brain is that our brain and our body don't know the difference between an actual event and the thoughts of an event, right? The same circuitry in the brain happens, right? If you're just imagining, losing your job because of a project gone bad or not being able to pay a bill and the eventual consequences of that, your brain does not know the difference between just sitting at your desk and thinking about that and that stuff actually happening, right? And so that's where every time that happens, the only way that your brain and your body know how to respond to that is with the stress response, because they feel like something is wrong. We need to get out of this situation because something is dreadfully wrong, right? And so what they're doing is, your brain and your body together are going to trigger this sympathetic nervous system, okay? When you do that, right, your blood pressure increases, your heart rate increases, your respiratory system becomes slow, very quick and shallow, right? Your digestive system shuts down. The body's ability to monitor and moderate and regulate blood sugar and cholesterols and all that kind of stuff shut down, right? Because again, your body is only concerned about surviving the next 5 minutes, right? Your body's not concerned with anything else, so everything else is just getting turned off, right? And now if this happens one day, and you go up in this hyperarousal and then come down 5 minutes later, no problem. No problem. That's not at all a problem for your body. Your body can do that every single day, even, once a day. The problem is when it becomes part of our thoughts, right? It happens over and over and over and over and over again. And what happens is we just stay in that place of hyperarousal, that sympathetic nervous system, right? We stay there until we do something to bring ourselves back down. Okay, now, so that's why there are two major groups of risk to our health from this chronic stress, right? The first group comes from the actual process, and I'm going to go over this in a second, but the actual process of the stress response, right, on a chronic, prolonged level. The second group comes from the sort of indirect health risks that come from what we call maladaptive coping mechanisms, right? Because when you're in that place of hyperarousal all day, at some point you got to do something to make yourself come down, right? So you do things like you overeat, or you drink too much alcohol, or you smoke too many cigarettes. You're doing something to try to get yourself to feel good in the moment, to get rid of this terrible feeling of this stress that you're feeling all the time. But in the end, that behavior, maladaptive, right? It's bad for you in the end, right? And so let's go over these different health risks, and then I'm going to tell you something really fascinating also that kind of overarches all of this, okay? So the first group of health risks, let's call the direct risks to our health as a result of the stress response. Remember what I told you, when you're in the stress response, right, what you're doing is your body is the sympathetic nervous system, the sympathetic branch of your nervous system is active, right? And that makes your heart rate increase, your blood pressure increase, your respiratory system become shallow and quick, right? You're breathing from your chest, as well as, it winds up shutting down all these different systems of your body. So what results? Right? So when your heart rate is going up every single day, right, eventually that's going to result in a heart arrhythmia, right, which is an irregular heartbeat, right? That's something that will ultimately lead to cardiac disease, complications of some sort. You'll have to go see my friend who's a cardiologist, and you're going to, that's a big deal, obviously, right? If your heart stops going, then you stop going, right? That's one of the vital organs, right? And so if you're increasing your heart rate every single day throughout the day, over and over and over again, your heart just can't handle that, right? And so eventually that's what happens, right? It weakens, it becomes irregular, cardiac disease, all kinds of things start happening, and that's really bad, okay? The blood pressure, right? Every day, if you're in hyperarousal, your blood pressure is increased all the time, right? There's only so much of that your body can take before you're kind of, again, it's a direct result, right? And so as you're increasing your blood pressure every day, that's what we call chronic hypertension, right? That daily, that your blood pressure is that high over days and weeks and months and years, right? The damage that's caused by that is very severe, okay, very severe. You're talking about hardened arteries, you're talking about stroke risk, you're talking about, all kinds of things are going to come from this hypertension, right? Obesity is something that's very, very commonly associated with the stress response. When cortisol is flushing through your body, not only are you not digesting your food properly, and not only are you likely to maladaptively overeat, which we're going to talk about in a second, but you're also going to, the chemical response of that hormone actually makes you hold weight on your body. That's actually true in monkeys in Africa that this Dr. Sapolsky studies, right? He literally, you can see pictures and films of these monkeys with big guts on them, right? And that's because they're, because the hierarchy of their society, those are the monkeys that are feeling the stress, right? And so it's something that's automatic. It's not just about overeating and not just about not digesting, but the fact that the cortisol is in your body is going to make you gain that weight, and especially around the midsection, right, which is the worst place you want for it, because then that leads to inflammation, which leads to all kinds of other health issues that you could experience and likely will experience over time, right? And so immune system, right? Again, when you're in the stress response, right, your body is not worried about fighting a bacterial infection or a viral infection, right? It is not worried about any of that stuff in the least. In fact, it is deliberately going to not worry about that, right? And so what happens is, when you shut your immune system down for prolonged periods of time, not only are you going to be more susceptible to getting colds and viruses and all that, and that's been well studied, right? They did a study in England where they showed that in the civil service, it's Whitehall Street, number 1 Whitehall Street or something like that. But in that building where all the civil service for England is, the people who had the harder, more stressful jobs were calling in sick at a rate of like 4 times as much as the people on the upstairs floors who were not feeling the kind of the stress that the people down below were feeling, right? So you're going to get sick more often, but more scary than that is the fact that ultimately, when you do this to your immune system all the time, day after day after day after day, what you're also doing is you're increasing your risk of autoimmune diseases. And autoimmune diseases are no joke, okay? We're talking about ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. We're talking about lupus. We're talking about rheumatoid arthritis. We're talking about very, very serious conditions that are life-changing, some life-shortening. Right? So it's not just something that's like, oh, well, I'll deal with my stress someday. Okay, these are the literal present risks that are coming strictly, directly from the stress response itself, right? So now let's talk about those indirect health risks, right? So these come from, again, when you're in that place of stress all day, right, there's only so much that you can handle that, right? There's only so much you're able to put up with that, right? So generally speaking, people tend to have certain behaviors that go along with that chronic stress, okay? People tend to be overeaters. They tend to have addiction issues, right? They tend to turn to alcohol in large quantities. They tend to smoke cigarettes in large quantities. They tend to be more sedentary. They tend to not go to the gym, even though going to the gym is the perfect thing for them, right? Like that's how you can release some of that stress and get your body to kick into that parasympathetic nervous system. But because we're all wrapped up in everything that's going wrong, those are the people less likely to join a gym and to keep going to the gym, right? Because of, and again, that's an indirect effect of the stress itself, right? And so what happens with all this, right? So if you're drinking too much, that's going to damage your liver. If you're smoking cigarettes all the time, that's obviously going to put you at a higher risk of lung disease as well as cardiac diseases. And when you add that to the heart arrhythmia, that's a bad formula right there. Putting on the weight and not processing blood sugar and everything, then that is also going to lead to things like diabetes and obesity and all kinds of really, really scary stuff. Okay, so again, this is all to say that the stress that you're feeling is as much as you might think like, oh, it's just part of life, it's just what drives me, I'll get through it, it's okay, it's just my job, all this. It's like, no, every day you're putting yourself further and further along on these health risks. Now let me tell you about the granddaddy of all, okay? And this is a good news, bad news thing, okay? Telomeres. Okay, telomeres are these fascinating things. They're like I've heard them discuss it from neuroscientists and people who know these things. I guess epigeneticists who say that the telomeres are these little caps at the ends of the chromosomes in your cells, right? And you can liken them very much to the plastic cap at the end of a shoelace, right? When that plastic cap falls off the end of a shoelace, the shoelace unravels, right? And you can't get it through the hole in your shoe anymore. So you got to throw that shoelace away and get a new one, right? The shoelace is dead, right? So the same thing happens with your telomeres. When they dissolve and they pop off the end of your chromosomes dissolve and they no longer function. They can no longer tell your cell how to replicate, how to divide, how to be the cell that it's supposed to be. And therefore, that cell dies. And then if enough of those cells die, then the organism dies. And that's what happens in old age, right? That's how our bodies just expire from old age. People who are generally healthy, but just 90 years old, their bodies just start to die because that's what's happening to their cells. Their telomeres are popping off and dissolving, and their cells are just dying off, right? And that is a very natural occurrence, right? When we're babies, our telomeres are nice and long, and slowly, every time your cells divide, it shortens just a little bit, right? And over the course of 90 years, that's the process, right? I have good news and bad news. Okay, I'm going to give you the bad news first, right? The people who have been studied under chronic stress, specifically there's a study I read about that followed a group of special needs parents, right? Or parents of special needs children, right? That's a very, very stressful situation, a situation that just never gives up, right? It's just constant, 24/7, you're on, right? And they followed these people, and what they found was their telomeres, okay, each year they were tested, their telomeres, against a control group, right, of people in the same age, same body type, same, cultural background, everything else controlled except for this, special needs parenting. They found that compared to the control group, their telomeres were shortening by a 6-to-1 ratio, meaning every year that this group went, their telomeres shortened by a measure of this group's 6 years. Okay, so in other words, you're taking years off your life, like 6 times faster, right? That's the bad news, right? The good news is, and this is really good news, okay, is that there's been plenty of studies that show that people who practice mindfulness and meditation, okay, after as little as 8 weeks, 20 minutes a day for 8 weeks, have been shown to increase the length of their telomeres. At the very least to slow down the process, but actually increase it in many cases, right? It has to do with the production of an enzyme called telomerase, right, which strengthens the telomeres, right? And that's what happens when we practice meditation, when we stop our mind from going through this really stressful process of worrying about what's going to happen in the future or what happened in the past, and we simply dwell within what's happening. That's our body's chance to actually heal itself, right? Now, there's even more health issues, right? There's issues with your memory. There's issues with your IQ, right? People have been tested in the stress response. Their IQ, in the presence of cortisol, their IQ has dropped nearly 50%. Right? So I could go on and on and on. I've already been here for 20 minutes here, so I'm going to wrap it up. But there are so many health risks to stress. And the thing is that if you look at the benefits of mindfulness, it's like a mirror image, right? Mindfulness has been known to reduce cardiac disease, to reduce cholesterol in the body, to reduce it increases memory, it increases the cognitive function of the brain, right? It increases there was a study done in 2003 with Richie Davidson and John Kabat-Zinn where they went into a biotech firm that was known for like 24/7 craziness, right? And they took 2 groups. They put one group through John Kabat-Zinn's 8-week mindfulness-based training, stress reduction training, and the other group just went to the gym, right? And what they did was at the end, not only was this the group that went through the mindfulness program, not only were they reporting feeling better, feeling less stress, feeling able to process their stress and to process what was causing the stress better, but they timed this. These people are brilliant. Richie Davidson and John Kabat-Zinn are brilliant people, and so they timed it to be right that the program would end right at the beginning of flu season. So what they did was they took both groups and they gave them all flu shots. The group that practiced mindfulness produced more antibodies to the flu shot. So you're actually increasing your immune system by doing this. Not just decreasing it by removing the stress, but actually increasing it through the practice of mindfulness and meditation. So if that's not enough to convince you of the benefits of this work, then we got to talk, because I got to somehow get through to you. But this is, seriously, what we're talking about is very, very serious issues, threats to your health, and the answer is so easy. You have it right at your fingertips, okay? 10, 15 minutes a day is going to make a huge difference in this. And not only that, it's going to make you feel better. It's going to give you a way to live your life on your terms, not on the terms of your stress. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. I hope you're doing well. And if you have any questions about this or you want to talk more about it, please hit me up with a comment. Let's talk, okay? This is very important stuff. All right, everybody. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.